Good evening, members and officers of the Council, and welcome to the meeting of the Standards Committee. There is a new system that is recording, so can I please ensure that you use your microphones when you are talking, because apparently it's not very clear if you don't use your microphone. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security door to the left of the chair or opposite the lifts in the foyer. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the green, and officers will assist you and advise when it's deemed safe to return to the chamber. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? Good. Please note the meeting is being live streamed for members of the public, except for any item of business where exempt or confidential information is considered following the exclusion of the press and the public from the meeting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel. Would everyone present please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber while this meeting is in progress. Would any member wish to speak under Council Procedure 1? Please announce it now. No, good. We have received apologies of absence from Councillor Crowe-Brown and Mr Lee Wellbrook. Are there any other apologies?
No, everyone's here. Good.
Minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of June. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of June 2021 be approved and signed as a correct record. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Scobie. Unless anyone objects to the minutes, I will take them as agreed. Thank you. Item Agenda 3. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Good. Item Agenda 4 is recommendations from the Standards Assessment Subcommittee. Estelle would like to introduce this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So item 4 are recommendations from the Standards Subcommittee. These recommendations arise out of the subcommittee's consideration of a number of complaints over the last few months about councillors' membership or use of social media groups and sites. The subcommittee sees that there is some lack of understanding within town and parish councils, and perhaps with district members as well, about how involvement in social media sites or groups might impact on a member's decision making during committees, for example by constituting a conflict or a particular interest. The subcommittee recommended, therefore, that the council sources some specific training about social media for all councillors and also for those town or parish councillors who might be interested. The subcommittee also recommends that the existing guide to social media in the Constitution is updated to include the latest advice from the Local Government Association on the use of social media by councillors. So those are the two recommendations from Standards Subcommittee before you tonight, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Duckworth.
Yes, so it says that the training should be offered and then the existing guide should be updated. I'm just wondering if those two things should be sort of like the other way round, or if it makes any difference that so that we know what the guide is before we do the training, sort of thing. And I suppose we need to be careful. I saw that people can obviously be part of a pressure group, but they just need to be careful what they say. And we need to make sure that distinction is made.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's been one of the problems in some of the complaints that we've dealt with, that there's been the Standards Assessment Subcommittee has given some informal recommendations on a couple of these complaints, and then there's been a bit of a frenzy of soul searching about, and people have been understandably anxious about being members of Facebook groups, and we've said all along it's absolutely fine for people to be members of these Facebook groups, but then you just have to be a bit thoughtful about when you're talking about things or making a particular decision about what you may have said on social media or anything like that. And it's quite a difficult area. I know other people in local councils that I've spoken to have also said that it's quite a difficult area because of course the Code of Conduct precedes the era of social media, because that's come upon us very rapidly in the last few years. So absolutely, so the latest local government association guidance on social media is fairly brief but quite helpful, and that's very easily updated into our existing guide. And then following on from that, we can look at finding somebody to come in and talk about social media and just make members feel maybe a bit more at ease about it. Because we have had a bit of a flurry of complaints back and forward between sort of different groups on different sides of a debate about what somebody's membership of a particular group means and how it means they can or can't participate. And so I just think a bit of clarity on that for members would be very helpful. So that's what the subcommittee were talking about, and that was what they've recommended. But we can certainly update the guidance very, very easily. Wouldn't take very long at all.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Councillor. I'd just like to add to that the problems we have come across, I think is the right expression, that myself and Estelle are actually going to visit parish and town council meetings so we can have a face-to-face meeting with them to explain the grey areas, to hopefully that will clarify anything and just stop this plethora of complaints that are coming through. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine, Chairman. Yeah, we've had, way back now, this has been a problem for a long time, that we've had meetings within our own parish to establish some sort of code with regard to social media. Well, I see, I mean, you're saying training should be offered. Is that literal, that you'll offer it, or is it going to be a compulsion?
Yeah, I don't think we could make it compulsory, but it would be offered, and obviously people would be encouraged to come, and we would look to do it in whatever way is best for people. So we could maybe offer it online or offer a session here in the council chamber. So we just need to look into it and see what's easiest for people to access. And there might also be some e-learning, the dreaded e-learning, which everybody's horrified about. But we might be able to find something that can, as well as offering some in-person training, that we could maybe offer some e-learning sessions in support that people can choose to dip in and out of. So I don't think we could make it compulsory, but hopefully we would encourage people to attend.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you. I'm just wondering, on the subject of things being compulsory, if we have more complaints come in and it is against someone who hasn't been undertaken the training voluntarily, is there then a case for saying, well, you do need to undertake it now? And I don't know how you make it compulsory, but is there a step in between that could be considered?
Thanks very much. The difficulty is if say the worst thing happened and there was a complaint against a councillor in respect of something that had gone on in their involvement on social media, we would bring it to the assessment subcommittee. They would look at it. So far, with some of these complaints, there's just been informal action recommended in order, and that can't compel anybody to do anything. It's just a recommendation that somebody perhaps attends some training or makes an apology or does something. But because it's an informal action, we can't compel that. The only way that somebody could be compelled to do something would be if a complaint was serious enough so that it went forward for investigation. And then you would have an investigation, and if the investigator found that there had been a breach, then there would be a hearing, and then there would be sanctions imposed. And sanctions imposed from a hearing can include a requirement to attend training. So it's a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but that's the only way I think we could impose compulsory training. I mean, later on in the agenda tonight, we're going to talk about, the next report talks about the areas of training within the council that are compulsory, but there's only a few, and something like this I don't think we could, unless it fell out of an investigation and a hearing and a decision of the the standards investigation.
Just say thank you. I think that answers the question.
Councillor Copp, did you?
Thank you. Two questions. Are the majority of these complaints coming from councillors themselves, or is it more a general public that they're coming from?
No, they're coming from councillors themselves. I think that's all you need to know, really.
There has been one from a member of the public, and that's all. Does anybody else have any questions? No? Good. In that case, the recommendations are that we need to agree that training should be offered to councillors on declarations of interest and issues about membership of social media groups, to include independent persons and town/parish councils, and also to agree to recommend to the council that the existing guide to social media in part 5 of the Constitution, Codes and Protocols is updated in light of recently published guidance by the LGA about code of conduct issues, and specify specifically council's use of social media. To ensure that this goes to the council, obviously we need a proposer and a seconder. Right, proposed by Councillor Fellows and seconded by Councillor Bayford. Are we all in agreement? Right, item agenda 5. This is to do with recommendations from the Constitutional Review Working Party, and I'll ask Estelle to comment on it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. So these are recommendations from the Constitutional Review Working Party. There are 3 recommendations which concern amending the Constitution, arising out of consideration of these issues by the group. So the first is a proposed amendment to the delegations for Planning Committee. So currently the items which must be taken to committee and cannot be decided under delegated powers by the officers include situations where the application is by or on behalf of Thanet District Council. It is proposed that this statement is expanded to include specific reference to situations where the application is on land owned by Thanet District Council or owned by a company of which Thanet District Council is a party. The issue has arisen out of the recent judicial review decision on a planning application for land adjacent to Leyland Gap School, in which the judge said that the existing wording in the delegation covers a situation where the application relates to land owned by a company, in this case East Kent Opportunities Limited, of which the council is a party. The judge said that, although there was no evidence of bias in this particular decision, there was the possible perception of bias in the wording of the delegation, and therefore it was ambiguous. Therefore, the proposed change in wording intends to clarify the situations where an application will be considered by the Planning Committee and remove ambiguity in the wording. The second recommendation on the paper is a proposal to amend Article 8 in the Constitution, which covers mandatory training for members sitting on planning, licensing and general purposes committees. The proposal is to amend the required frequency of training from every 6 months to once a year. As the report states, this is simply to ease burden on members and officers. Additional training will always be given when required. And finally, the third recommendation is simply to clear up an anomaly and remove paragraph 5 from the Council's protocol for the guidance of Planning Committee members and officers, since the paragraph is now redundant because of Article 8. And that's it, unless anybody has any questions. You might have some questions on the first recommendation, I imagine.
Excuse me, can we help?
I was just saying, is this an open meeting? It's a public meeting.
It's a public meeting, yes.
You can have a seat, yeah.
Councillor Crittenden.
It's just a very, very minor point on the wording at the top of page 12 in para 2. It talks about the planning committee attending at least one session, whereas for licensing board it says one training session, and for general purposes it says one training session. So I'm assuming that that should be one training session for planning as well as the other 2. So it's just a... Yeah,
That's correct, yes.
just wondered if it could be corrected as a typo.
Yeah, I'm sure we can correct that, can't we? Yeah. Anybody else got any comments to make? Councillor Bayford?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about situation where someone subs on a committee. They would have to have had previous training on all three of those?
Yes, that's correct.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions? In that case, we can move on. And the recommendations in the report were considered by the Constitutional Review Party on the 11th of November. And after discussion on the matter, they agreed to put to the Standards Committee that members agree the specific amendment to the planning protocol to require all planning applications and applications under planning legislation to be reported to the Council's Planning Committee. If Thanet Council own the land to which the application relates, or if a company which the Council is party to owns the land to which the application relates. We've heard the comments made by Estelle and any questions raised. Could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Cupp and Councillor Duckworth. Item agenda 6 is my report, and following on from the two reports that we've just received, I wanted to say that it's been a busy...
Sorry, Chair. Sorry.
I do apologise, ladies and gentlemen, but the recommendations, we collectively thought it was in, all three were embodied into that recommendation. So what I'll do, I'll read all three recommendations out to you. And the recommendations are: recommendation 1, to agree to recommend to Council to amend Part 3, Section C of the Constitution, Council functions carried out by committees as follows. 2.2, within the policies laid down by the Council, the committee will, 2.21, determine individual applications for planning permission and any other application made under planning legislation where A, it is an application which the Director of Housing and Planning or Planning Applications Manager, in consultation with the Chairman or Vice Chairman of the Planning Committee, considered it to be of significant public interest. And B, it is an application which Council members have specifically requested to be referred to the Planning Committee in accordance with the requirements of any member's call-in procedure from time to time approved by the Council, set out in the protocol for the guidance of Planning Committee members and officers. C, the application has been submitted by or on behalf of a member or an officer of the Council. And D, it is an application by or on behalf of Thanet District Council on land owned by Thanet District Council or any company which Thanet District Council is a party. Can we break it down into three recommendations, or just do you want it all as one?
You can read them all out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Recommendation 2, I know you've got copies, but obviously we need to read them out. To agree to recommend to Council to amend Article 8 of the Council's Constitution as follows. 8.02. No member or substitute member of the General Purposes Committee, Planning Committee or the Licensing Board will be allowed to take their seat on the committee unless they have received relevant, appropriate, up-to-date training. And 8.03. In relation to the Planning Committee, this is attending at least one training session run by the Council's planning team every year. In relation to the Licensing Board, this is attending at least one training session run by the Council's licensing team every year. In relation to the General Purposes Committee, this is attending at least one training session run by the Council's monitoring officer at least every year. And the final recommendation, to agree to recommend to delete paragraph 5 regarding training from the Council's protocol for the guidance of Planning Committee members and officers, which states, Council appoints members to the Planning Committee at the annual meeting and is legally required to give preference to the nominations of the political party groups in order to achieve party political balance. This will take priority over any other requirement that the council may wish to impose on the appointment of members to the planning committee, such as a requirement that a member will first receive training. However, it is expected that all members of the planning committee, including substitute members, will participate in initial and regular update training, and members who are not willing to do so should decline to be appointed to the planning committee. Could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Cupp and Councillor Duckworth. Thank you very much. That removes that anomaly. Item agenda 6, which is the chairman's report. Following on from the 2 reports we've just received, I wanted to say it's been an extremely busy 2 months for the Standards Committee. You will see from item 7 on the agenda, there have been numerous complaints submitted since the last Standards meeting that were along similar lines. There was a group of complaints that required clarification to the complainants on the code of conduct and/or meeting procedure, and as such, those complaints were not taken further. Another group of complaints was connected to the need and procedure for declaring interests in meetings. I think it's safe to say that Estelle has commented already on it, but it's obviously a very grey area. It's not the initial pecuniary interest, it's the secondary one where you have members of certain bodies that are on social media and whether or not they are entitled to speak concerning that subject at a council meeting. And that is where the grey area is. There is a situation where Estelle can grant a general letter of exemption, I think it's terminated as.
Well, we haven't done this, but we've discussed where there is a situation where there might be some conflicting interests which are causing people to have difficulty contributing in meetings, and where the particular group of councillors in a town or parish is quite small, that then, you know, people might perceive that certain people can't speak or they're prevented from speaking simply by being members of these social media forums, that we could possibly get around it by issuing a dispensation, which we can do. This committee can do, actually I don't have the power, but this committee can do to enable councillors to fully participate. But I don't think we've actually got that far yet, but we have discussed that being a possibility. So we've just sort of talked about it in general terms, but we haven't actually taken that action yet. So it hasn't quite been seen to be necessary, but that is one way that we could go if it continues to be a problem.
Does anybody wish to make any comment?
So are you saying an example of when a dispensation might be given? So for example, say you've got a small parish where you've only got, I don't know, a handful of councillors on the parish, and say, for example, I won't use a social media example, but say, for example, there's, I don't know, there's I don't know, campaign to raise funds for a village hall or something like that, that is run by the parish council, and then there's a separate body set up to manage that campaign, of which certain numbers of the parish council are members because there's nobody else to do it. So if they came to a meeting to discuss progress on the village hall or to make a decision on the progress of raising funds for the village hall, strictly speaking, some of those members may have interests or conflicts to declare and might be, under the code of conduct, might be prevented from speaking and fully taking part. So in that sort of situation, that's maybe not a brilliant example, but off the top of my head, in that sort of situation where you've only got a small parish or a small group of councillors making decisions, if they all had to declare an interest, it would make it impossible to continue. So you can then, individual councillors can apply to us as the district council and yourselves as a standards committee to give a dispensation, which means that they, for a certain number of years, up to a maximum of 4 years, it enables them to sort of then carry on acknowledging that they may have an interest, but actually in order to carry out the business they can continue and participate and take those decisions. It's normally where you've got, it wouldn't probably impact on a district council because of the number of councillors, but it's more to do with smaller parish councils where the nature of what they're dealing with locally means that inevitably lots of people might be involved, and also the numbers that they have mean that they don't have very many councillors, and so the dispensation regime is there to enable rules to be waived, if you like, to enable the parish council to, or any councillor, to participate in certain situations. It's not just to do with numbers. There's other criteria which are applicable and are listed in the Constitution. So yes, I mean I've only ever dealt with an application for dispensation at a previous council, not here, but it does happen, and it's quite a useful tool. But it would be a decision for the Standards Committee to make.
Just slightly worried that we stand on political manifestos and you say I'm against building this housing estate or I'm against this airport, and actually standing on that manifesto, are you putting yourself against being able to act on the planning committee or the licensing committee for those things?
Yeah, no, you're not, because and what you're talking about is not so much interest, it's more to do with bias or predetermination or being conflicted. And the case law about bias and predetermination is actually quite interesting, because councillors actually have a lot of leeway, and it's recognised that in a local context, particularly district or parish or town level, there are issues of real high local interest, and that's what councillors are appointed to do, to argue one way or the other on particular political lines or particular views in favour or against. But there have been cases where you might think, oh gosh, so and so was predetermined, and they've gone all the way to the court, and the court says no, actually this is just a councillor promoting what he or she is appointed to do and supporting the cause, as it were. But what you have to be careful of is, again, it's this terrible phrase, sort of approaching a meeting with an open mind. So you may have been elected on a ticket to oppose something or support something, but as long as you're not demonstrating, and in fact you are approaching these meetings with an open mind, listening to the arguments, making the decision, taking into account all the evidence, then you avoid it. The point is to avoid, if you're accused of something like bias or predetermination, it's at that point that you have to be able to show that you've taken these decisions with an open mind, even though it's perfectly fine to say, well, I'm a member of this group and that group, and I was elected on a mandate to do X, Y, and Z. But I'm here to listen to all the arguments, and I take into account all the points of view, and then I make my decision. So that's the point. It's not so much about interests, if you're elected on a particular, to take a particular view or because of a particular stance. It's about avoiding an accusation of bias or predetermination, or in fact being conflicted or showing yourself to be biased because of something you've done, perhaps publicly or in the press or that sort of thing. So, I think of, sort of attending demonstrations and waving banners about and that sort of thing. But even then, I think there's been cases that have said, well, no, actually, this councillor was just supporting his or her constituents, etc. So it's quite a nuanced area, and it's quite a tricky area. But the thing is just to always be careful and thoughtful about it. And that's all one can say, really.
Does anybody else have any comments? The other thing we thought about with this as well is try to get some common sense into the decision making by councillors when they do go to meetings and speak, having been elected on a mandate. And it's as we've obviously just identified by this small situation, it's a real grey area. The new guidelines from the LGA help, I think, tremendously, hence why we've offered to go and advise parish and town councils before they overstep the mark and what is available to them to be able to discuss and vote on the subject matter that's on the agenda. Anybody else got any comments? Sorry, the Constitutional Review Working Party has only met once since the last meeting of the Standards Committee, and that's to discuss the topics in the agenda item 5. The last scheduled meeting of the Standards Committee on the 14th of September was cancelled due to the paucity of business. And then we move on to the last item of the agenda. And as you can see, that's the statistics. And when you do look at the back page of recent assessments that we have had to deal with, that highlights the problem that has arisen, hence the reason for the discussion we've just had. Does anybody want to make any comments? I think that sums up then the conclusion of the business. Thank you all very much for attending.